Hello, and thank you for joining me for this wee bit of background to the story that I've just told the children. It's a bit of background because the story is actually, on the face of it, quite a simple story. But like most of the Bible, what is simple to one can be complex to someone else. The story, some have tried to say that it's historical. Some have tried to say it was a parable. Me, I think it probably just came from the mind of a clever person, possibly the man Jonah himself, who was a prophet from about 750 to 800 BC. He was a prophet during a quite turbulent time in the nation of God's chosen people. But in that turbulence, he tells that lovely little story. And you can just imagine people sitting down listening to the story, as possibly your kids did as I told the story to them. But maybe after they were told the story, the people in Jonah's time would ask questions, and they'd maybe challenge some of it. That can't be real. A fish inside the tummy for 3 days? Or maybe they just accepted it as a miracle sent from God. Now please, don't have me say that miracles don't happen. Could this story have happened? Of course it could. Do I think it did happen? No, I don't think it did. I think it was a story penned to to teach a lesson. And the story starts off with this good man called Jonah, and God calls him for a mission. Nineveh was famous in the area for a kind of, how would I describe it? In old-fashioned terms, a den of iniquity. It was a city that had lost its way. It was a city who turned against God and his teachings. It was a city that only lived for itself, for its own people, in its selfish nature. And God was not happy with the city. Now, Nineveh could be replaced by any place that we could maybe think of today with the same problems. And I suspect most places could, at one point or another, be a Nineveh today. And Jonah is told by God, I want you to go and tell them the message, a message that they need to change their ways. But you know, when God calls and gives you a task to do, it's not always easy to follow. In fact, it takes a bit of an effort sometimes to pack up your own life and to go and follow God. I know when I was called to become a minister, and I didn't have a one-to-one conversation like Jonah appears to have with God, but a series of events led to me challenging God. Prove to me that this is what you want, and then I'll give up my life to serve you. And at the time, it sounded ridiculous. But looking back, I believe that God responded, and I became a minister. And I became a minister, and I have to be honest, I've never looked back. My life is so much better than I could ever imagine it, because I responded to God's call. But Jonah wasn't like that in the story. In the story, the person wanted to head away. He didn't want to go and face all these ruffians, these bad people that lived in Nineveh. He was a good man, we were told. So he headed in the other direction. Now, God has a way of making things work out according to his plan. It might be hard for us to hear that in this time of pandemic, when we think this is not part of God's plan. But God has a way of using circumstances to suit. And so in this story we are told of a storm. A storm that was so wild that everyone on board the ship would have drowned, Had Jonah, the goodness of his heart, said it's my fault, he could have stayed below. He could have worked throwing things overboard. He could have told nobody, and maybe the boat would have been washed away. But the goodness, the point of God calling him for his good heart, he had to sacrifice himself for others. Throw me over. And the story, he was thrown over. But the story tells us that that's not the end, because in the water, God sends a fish, or a whale. We often say a whale, but the Bible and the story says a big fish. And the big fish gave Jonah a chance to think. Inside the tummy for 3 days. It's presumably a ridiculous story. For to get to a stomach, I suspect you have to go through all this sort of, and it's probably not feasible. Hence, I don't believe it as a factual story. But there was a time when he was able to consider what God was doing for him. God had sent a means of his rescue. And God rescues us too. And eventually, he gets thrown out onto the beach, and this time listens to God's call and goes to Nineveh. But the people of Nineveh, well, he turns up and he finds that they're just as was expected. And he goes round and he challenges them all to change their ways. And amazingly, they did. But for Jonah, that wasn't enough. He was a good man. He was doing God's work. He said in 40 days God's going to destroy your city because of your badness. Although he called them to change their ways, he was more interested in the punishment that went because of how they'd lived their lives. Jonah got grumpy, angry, frustrated with God when the destruction didn't happen. And you know, that's that righteous indignation that some people have, and it's a false righteous indignation. Jesus was angry at when the people were selling wares in the temple, fraudulently cheating the pilgrims, and he got angry, a righteous anger. But so many of us today have this false righteous anger. It's a I'm good and you're bad type anger. God sees right through it. And God wants to forgive everyone who's sorry. Whether you're a good person, like Jonah was, who made a mistake, like Jonah did, who was rescued by God, or whether you'd lived a life of, well, going against God's way, as the people that Nineveh was known as. As soon as they said they were sorry and meant it, God forgave them. And as Christians, so should we. So we need to forgive one another as God forgives us. And that's the message, the deeper message of the story of Jonah. It's a message that God forgives those who are sorry. And we have to do likewise. Hope that helps a wee bit if any of the kids ask any questions about the story. I don't imagine they will. I'm sure they'll be quite happy with just the story of the big fish. But enjoy the activities with them, and if I can do anything to help you in any way, please be in touch. Thank you. Bye-bye.